Professor, welcome to Kivumbi 2017. Let me begin with a question we're interacting with viewers with this morning. Has your confidence in the IEBC to conduct flawless polls been shaken by the murder of the ICT manager, Chris Msando?
It's not only an issue for Chris Msando's murder. And let me first of all take this opportunity to send a message of condolences to the family, IEBC and Kenyans as a whole. Before his murder, actually, Kenyans did not have confidence because of the litigations that were going on and also the bickering between the politicians, both NASA and the ruling party. And the way things were happening were not really raising a level of confidence in the majority of Kenyans, including myself.
And of course, that particular death, throws a spanner into the works, especially considering that he was to play a rather important role in the dry run of the transmission of election results on the 31st. Now, that process is going to be happening again today. And in the wake of that, there's been several calls, even from the opposition, that they want foreign experts now to come in and help secure the IEBC servers. Do you think this is something that is necessary just 5 days to the election?
I don't think we're this issue of foreign. Every time anything happens in this country, you find people coming up with this myopia of calling in foreigners. We should move away from that kind of mindset and look at things as Kenyans. If you are a married man and you have a family in your house and there's an issue, you don't expect people to, or you don't come up and say, well, I will need others to come and solve my domestic issues. And as an international lawyer, I don't think whether this issue of calling in foreigners will help. What are they going to do within this short span of time?
Right.
Let us face the issues the way they are. And if we have not learned from the past, then when are we going to learn? The same people who are calling for foreigners have been in this situation before. They have been part of previous governments, and they have not come up with the regulations to tighten up the rules. So that, to me, is a waste of time.
Right. And first of all, even before we delve into that conversation, are you satisfied in the manner in which Msando's death has been handled? Of course, investigations are ongoing. The post-mortem will be done today. And we've had the political class. President Uhuru Kenyatta has given his condolences. Raila Odinga has given his condolences. But do you feel that this now has been turned into a political tool?
Well, condolences from the two leaders, both NASA and Uhuru, are crocodile tears. Because why would you come up to give or to go through the same theories that you have been having? First, the scene of crime has been tampered with. And as a lawyer, both in the UK and the US, and having been a police officer for a very long time, when there is a homicide of that magnitude, what ought to have happened is the preservation of the scene of crime, and then secondly, to bring in those who ought to do what they ought to do under their expertise involving members of the family. In this situation, the scene of crime has been tampered with. The man was killed in another county. That county has got a hospital. It has got a morgue. The man was transferred almost immediately to a hospital in a neighboring county. While the police were looking for his body, another contingent of police had already taken. Does it mean there is a disconnect between police communication?
When you say the crime scene had been tampered, yes, what do you mean, first of all? Because I did speak to the police boss, police spokesman Charles Owino here yesterday, and he said, first of all, with regard to the car that was parked somewhere along Thika Road, he wasn't sure what Kenyans expected, because he says the car was dusted by forensic experts before it was towed to the police station.
Well, dusting of the car and removal of the body from the crime scene are two different things. Why was it dusted almost immediately and removed? Why was the body removed almost immediately by a contingent of police officers? Was an identification done on the scene of crime? Was the autopsy carried on? Were investigators there at the scene of crime, and for how long, and what did they take? What kind of forensic examination is going to come out of a mere body from the morgue?
Right.
They ought to go to the scene of crime, reconstruct that scene of crime, come up and find out from theories of where this ought to have done and what have you. What time was that? Timelines. In the US, for example, when there is a homicide, there are about 3 teams of investigators that come in. First, there is the police. Second, there is the ambulance team. Third, there is the firefighters. And fourth, there are homicide detectives from both the state and the federal investigation agencies. They come in and take samples for different analyses. Here we have just the police. Was it police from which crime unit and for what purposes at that particular time? Did we have them from CID crime unit at that particular time? Did we have police officers from the county, the station, or the division where he was? Who was the command in charge? Who was giving which instructions at that particular time? And why did they have to transfer him to the mortuary in another county? And finally, what methodologies were applied? Did we have photographic evidence? Did we have satellite pictures taken? Did we have any kind of recording? Did we even go to the NSIS? NSIS plays a big role. I was in the NSIS, the defunct special branch, and they ought to have also liaised with this unit to find out about the movement of this person, because I'm sure that this man was a person of high personality, and his movements ought to have been, and for security purposes, because of the docket he was running, his movements, his activities, his moral responsibility and aptitude ought to have been observed under the microwave.
Right, and of course, we've had footage from CCTV cameras showing his last moments. But let's focus on the more important issue here, and this is the fact that the opposition has already accused the Jubilee administration, saying that one Msando's death is related to election rigging in the country. What, first of all, do you think this does to the confidence of Kenyans with regard to the voting process, the security of the IEBC servers to begin with?
Has the opposition learned from what happens in Nigeria, where political parties do things to win the sympathies of other people? Why would they come up and say it is the Jubilee that killed? What evidence do they have? Why should also Jubilee come out and say it is the NASA that have killed? These kind of speculations are very, very damaging. What if results point fingers at some people from the NASA party who were not satisfied with what was going on? What if it happened on the other side? This kind of speculations from the leaders we need to elect right now, coming from their mouths, I think it's up to Kenyans to judge the kind of mouthpieces we have in this country.
Right, but you know, the bigger picture is especially just 5 days to the election would be what this does, especially with regard to voter apathy and the numbers that turn out. Well,
to some extent, yes, we have got people who are waiting for this kind of situations to arise, to take advantage of that. We have people from both sides of political divide who will always take whatever is said by their leaders. Now, fingers are being pointed out at the government, which, well, they have a right to do so, but in my opinion, as a lawyer, pointing fingers without justification is not something that I will take very lightly. Now, if you're trying to incite your voters by pointing fingers, then that means that you are taking advantage of the death of an innocent man. You are taking advantage of the family of this man by trying to speculate, by trying to impugn when you are going to be caged with the responsibility of this national security of this country when you take over power. So if you're going to be this kind of material that's going to be elected when you're a speculator, then I don't see where common sense is.
Absolutely. And of course, matters of security for IEBC officers, returning officers have been raised. But we had information that one Chris Msando had reported this matter to the police. Police spokesperson Charles Owino says they were personal friends, and that matter was reported personally to him. But this still happened. With regard to security, does this assure Kenyans that enough measures have been put in place to ensure their security?
Let's find out what Charles Owino has done. If they were friends and somebody went to him and told him, look, this is what's happening to me, he ought to have done what he ought to have done. Right. By coming on television and telling the world, or maybe winning the sympathy of the family, I mean, that is also very speculative from a very senior officer like Charles Owino to come in to speculate nonsense. What happened? I'm told that the victim reported the matters to the police station, Central Police Station last year in December. When did he also report to Charles? And what did Charles take? This is also some kind of impunity within the police service, where leaders of that position or top officers of that position ought to seal their mouths and talk relevantly, work relevantly with their information, not to wait until somebody has died. It's when you come on national television to tell the whole world what they do safeguard you. They ought to have done something.
Right. What, in your view, should IBC do now in terms of a crisis management to raise the confidence of the electorate? Of course, there's a dry run of the election transmission results, which is being done today. But what else can they do to cement that confidence?
I think Mr. Chebukati has shot himself in the foot. The man's arrogancy, from the way I know him as a political party leader, having actually been addressed by him in the political party's liaison committee, his arrogancy and personality does not tally in well. He actually, let's put it this way. One, the IBC has been given security. There is no doubt in my mind that they have security, and it's him who is the chair who ought to have known which officer is assigned to who within the IBC. A person like Msando ought to have been given security. We don't know whether he had or not, or whether we don't know whether he had dispensed it. But now that he has died, Mr. Chebukati should come up and liaise with both parties. Liaise with the IBC, with the NASA, and liaise with Jubilee, and find out a compromising position rather than coming up and saying, we are okay. What's okay? When you're crying that there are problems within the IBC, there's an issue of national security. You should come out, sit down with both parties, both stakeholders, and say, now, what do we do?
Right.
To allay this kind of fear.
Right. And, of course, the manner in which our leaders also approach this matter is important in terms of how the electorate perceives the entire situation. And one politician who has been at the center of this entire saga is Gatundu South Member of Parliament Moses Kuria. In the dailies this morning, he is quoted as saying he owes no one any explanations with regard to the post that he put up on Facebook and has since taken down. And, of course, as it stands, it has not been confirmed initially whether that post was really from Moses Kuria, but the fact that he has said he owes no one any explanations is almost owning up to it. In terms of investigations, is this a man who needs to answer some questions with regard to the mysterious death of Chris Msando?
Two things about Moses Kuria. One, he ought to be inside right now answering some questions, because if that happened in the US, he would be frying somewhere in jail. He has a big mouth, and we have seen what that mouth has done before. But on the other side, let's take Moses Kuria as a person, just like our friend Miguna. Do you need to take Moses Kuria very seriously, really, right now? This man maybe was born... He's a political leader, was quite a bit of influence. He was born like that, with arrogancy, with some kind of ugly face. Whatever comes from his mouth is very ugly. I mean, why would people even look at him as a leader? This is a man who comes up and says you should arm yourself with machetes and chop off people from this side. This is a man who comes up and says things that are very ridiculous, and he is still a political leader. We don't need this kind of people in this country, and I'm sure that in 2022 things will change in this country, because one house will be down, because there are two houses which are competing, and people like us will be ready to assume power through the electorate. We'll have to dispense with people like Moses Kuria legally.
Right. So we will wait for law investigations and authorities to deal with that. Let's focus on the fact that we're just 5 days away from the elections. And last night, the last batch of our presidential ballot papers arrived in the country. And this is even with, while the conversation surrounding the extra 1.2 million ballot papers continues. Now, an explanation was given yesterday as to why there was 1.2 extra million ballot papers. And that is because of, the criteria in printing. A certain number must be printed in each booklet. But we've had calls now from several presidential candidates and their teams that they want these extra ballot papers to be destroyed. Is this something that is imperative, must be done before the election?
Yes, and I agree with NASA for the first time on that one. And before I go on, let's look at the contract. What was written in that contract? Let's look at specific clauses in the contract. We cannot come in and now do an extra work or violate the contract by putting in what ought not to have been in. I would have used a legal language in that particular process, but let's look at the contract and what the lawyers did, and somebody should go to court very quickly to actually interrogate that contract. If they said this number of ballot papers specifically, that's what ought to be there legally. But if somebody comes up with some stupid nonsense like, oh, because the booklet ought to contain this, then that's also nonsense to me, and I have no explanation.
Right. So you feel that the papers should be destroyed?
Yes.
All right. So ahead of the elections, of course, IEBC still trying to prepare the death of Chris Msando. There's issues with the IEBC. I mean, the director in the ICT department at IEBC, would you say the commission is ready for these polls? And if not, what do they need to put in place?
Let me put it this way. As much as I have come very hard in this interview, let's also give a leverage to the IEBC, because elections are never ready in any country. You'll find bickering. Even if you go in the US, you'll find out Democrats crying, Republicans also crying. This is going to be this way, court battles coming in and out. You go to the UK, it's the same thing. So let's take what is there and move with it.
Right, and of course, just as we near the elections, matters security have taken center stage. The police have explained what has been described as a mass exodus of people from urban areas, and they say this is because there was a lot of voter transfers during the mass voter registration period. But with regard to security, are you confident that enough measures have been put in place before, during, and after this election?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because the whole thing is flowed right from the registration of voters. The methodology applied is archaic. It's a 12th century methodology. Yet we have the money to spend on IBC. We ought to have had enough money to actually reform the whole system of voter registration, whereby people can register online and vote by proxy like it's done in the US, vote from where they are electronically rather than moving people from here to there. But because we are still a young democracy, we are hopeful that in future all these issues will be sorted out from the time when the person is born, the time when the person acquires a driver's license, whether to make this voter registration compulsory before you acquire certain government documents, so that we ease the burden for the future.
All right. And then it's a multi-sectoral approach as we head to this election, and still focusing on matters security. When analyzing the death of Chris Msando, you mentioned that there seems to be a disconnect in terms of communication between the police service, because we had one team searching for the body while one team had taken the body to the mortuary. But we've also seen the same happening in the Ministry of Defense with regard to the claims that KDF may be used to rig this election. Now, initially, we had the KDF spokesman come out in the wake of these claims by Raila Odinga and say the document that had been revealed was indeed authentic, just that it was taken out of context. Now, just yesterday, we had those, what he said, completely reversed, and they say that those documents did not exist to begin with. Again, in terms of cementing the confidence of Kenyans with regard to what is really going on, has this been done right?
I think those officers who are involved with those statements should be charged with treason. That's a treasonable offense for the Department of Defense or for the armed forces to interfere into the domestic affairs without the presidential decree. Well, people have always bashed Raila. Of course, I'm not a fan of Raila, but on this one, I will support him. Whenever Raila says anything, first of all, people come in and take it as air. But it always comes to pass. When he raised this issue, the likes of the ones I've mentioned came up and said a lot of things about Raila. The army itself came and said, yes, it was authentic. Now, what criteria have they used to reverse what they said? Are we playing reverse engineering here? Are we driving ourselves on the mountain in reverse gear? The armed forces should not, under any circumstances, unless there is a disaster in the country and unless they act within the law, involve itself in domestic affairs. That's a wrong signal, and that means that the utterances that Raila Odinga actually brought out are indeed true. So if that is true, then what else are we expecting? Free and fair elections? Hell no.
All right, Professor, let's wind up. And of course, the next time we sit here is probably going to be after the August 8th general election. Your word to Kenyans as they go out and vote? Well,
I'm sure that by now Kenyans have decided who to vote for, no matter what happens. And what I would rather say is just vote peacefully and go home. Wake up early, go cast your vote, because you are making your decision. Don't waste your time like where I come from in Mumias, where people go, stay on line for 10, 15 minutes, they get 50 shillings and they go away. This time, go and vote who you want to vote for. Let's have a change. Otherwise, some of us are coming in 2022 to ask for the same.
All right. So you will be running for president in 2022. That is something you are declaring officially.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor George Wajakoya, Professor of Law at the United States International University, speaking to us on various issues pertaining the election, especially the mysterious death of IEBC ICT manager Chris Msando. Remember, IEBC is today going to be conducting that dry run with for the IEBC results transmission, as it will happen on the 8th of August. A conversation that will be continuing in just a moment, but let's take a short break here on Kivumbi 2017, your unrivaled, unmatched election coverage right here on KTN News. Do stay with us, still more to come.